What's up, everybody? Constantly Shouting Man here, coming at you with a brand new tier list for the new 10.18 patch, where we're going to be breaking down our platinum and below tier list so that you can guaranteed climb, get tons of value, and as usual, let's kick it off with the mid lane. But of course, the GameLeap website is your one-stop shop. If you want to master mid lane, top, jungle, or any role in the entire game, do yourself a favor and go check it out in the links down below and watch in-depth challenger VODs that show you step-by-step how to improve. Don't miss out on this insane opportunity. But without further ado, let's just jump right into the video. Now, right off the bat, unfortunately for you mid laners, it's gonna be pretty tough for you. Broken tier displays 3 champions from last patch with only one missing: Annie, Galio, and Swain, with Fizz taking a hike down to S tier. It's worth mentioning that all these champions are pretty close in their performance, but the high end is Galio, with Fizz coming up on the lower end, which is why we ended up making the call to move him down the list. With certain champions being buffed and nothing that does well into Fizz getting nerfed, there really wasn't a reason to keep him up there at all. Since you guys already know the story about broken champions, let's instead highlight Nico, who was a new addition to S tier last time around. And all it took was some small numbers buffs here and there to increase her control over the game. Nico is a great lesson to show that even small changes can have big impacts over the course of each and every minute in the game. Now, similarly, Ahri moves up to join the ranks of S tier because of her brand new changes that should make her way more consistent and open up her early game, which was one of her key weaknesses before. Lucian is the last champion we will talk about before moving around in the mid lane. It seems that people have finally woken up and realized just how amazing he can be as a lane bully and how hard of a counterpick he can be to certain top tier champions. His buffs recently definitely helped him out of this as well, giving him some better damage throughout the game, and it is definitely felt, so you're gonna have a good time playing this champion. Now, for the most part, the mid lane has been rock steady. Most champions are in at least an okay spot, even some C tier picks have a place here and there. I guess this is exactly what Riot wants when we go into Worlds, but hopefully this patch isn't that boring. And even more importantly, hopefully Worlds isn't that boring. Although I think that we all can agree that's a pretty hard thing to accomplish. Now, moving on to the next thing that we're going to talk about top lane. And the broken tier in top lane for the first time in a long time features only one single champion, Urgot. With Shen's shielding nerf, he should be worthy of taking a step down, and let's face it, he's not totally dropping off of a cliff, but just down one single tier. Urgot has a lot of really powerful tools, and with the current state of top lane, he has been able to punish his enemies while scaling quickly. This is what allows Urgot to take over games all on his own, and you probably felt this if you played him or have played up against him. Now, since he isn't getting nerfed, and none of the champions that do very well against him are getting buffed, he should still be absolutely dominant, so as such, he's going to be in our top tier. For our next highlight, we need to drop it down into the A tier and talk about Maokai and Wukong, who have moved actually right next to each other. Now, these champions suffer from the same problems, however. While they might be great in smaller fights, when the bigger picture comes around, they usually just get outshined unless they're absolutely super fast. While yes, when you have flash up, a Wukong or a Maokai can make some really sick plays, why not just play Malphite instead and have a similar result without flash every single time? Now, towards the bottom of A tier, you'll notice Kayle has moved up quite a bit. Her buffs are really interesting and make her much less mana reliant in lane. On its own, it doesn't seem like that much, but you have to remember, without needing as much mana, you could change your starting item, change your runes, and do more to help out the early game. With a more solid early, Kayle can consistently scale into the late game, and we all know that once she gets there, she can go absolutely crazy. Now, last of the top lane, we gotta talk about Set, with huge changes to the passive and the Q. When you're playing Set, you are definitely gonna notice how much harder you are being hit. Just like Kayle though, I don't think the true power here is just the changes on its own. This could make something like a full AD build on Set super powerful. Who knows right now? The potential though is 100% there, I'm sure of it. Now, moving to the next section, we gotta talk about jungle. And jungle actually seems to be progressing towards a really nice place. The only thing that's sad is due to the meta, early game junglers kinda just suck, but that's exactly why some of them are getting fat buffs. Starting with the broken tier, I think last time I made the right call, but not completely. Fiddlesticks is an incredibly strong champion who scales really well. He just ticks almost all the boxes for being the best jungle champion. The last part is exactly why this time we've moved Hecarim up to join him. These two champions represent the top tiers of jungle with two very distinct styles. In S tier, we've moved up Karthus. By now, it should be pretty apparent this champion is once again kind of nutty. His insane clear, ridiculous scaling, and crazy presence at level 6 just makes him almost feel unbeatable. He still has his weaknesses, so no broken tier for this abomination of a jungler right now, but I'm still putting him all the way up in S tier. Now, A tier features two highlights, with Warwick coming down from S and Xin moving up from B. Warwick is just a bit out of place right now. You can still make great plays with him and snowball, but without R, he feels absolutely disgusting to play. If you ever fall on the back foot, it can reverse snowball real quick. Xin, on the other hand, got buffed this patch with some extra damage. You are gonna win fights you would have lost before and clear much faster. It's a tough call, but I do actually think it's enough to make him stand out, even if only by just a little bit. Now, last up for jungle, I do think that we might be a little bit too harsh on Lilia overall. It definitely is obvious that she is a difficult champion to execute. And even then, she still has some notable downsides. But she shouldn't be a C-tier champion in any of her roles, and certainly not here. There is something that we all are blind to still, but for her to stand out, there should probably be some extra changes that are needed. Now moving on to the next role that we have for you, it's ADC. And bot lane finally sees some pretty obvious changes and one of the most direct buffs we've seen in a while. Broken tier still only features Caitlyn. This champion is absolutely nuts right now, we all know it, and she is just too oppressive early on for someone who also scales like absolute crazy. The real movement is what happens around the rest of the tiers. The first movement you probably notice is Twitch moving up to S tier, and it's for good reason. While the AP buff to his E is pretty worthless, the real gold mine is the R changes. Now, I don't want any super hard numbers on this, but the TLDR is that Twitch, when he hits his R, is doing anywhere from 20 to 66% more damage to targets hit beyond the first. The minimum damage is way higher now, and the fall off is also much smaller. So sometimes you could just shred through entire team at times, and this champion was already solid, and now he's pretty close to being insane. Now, aside from Twitch, Ashe is going to stand her ground for us despite her small nerfs, as we don't think it's enough to completely move her down to A tier. In A tier though, you will notice that Kog'Maw has moved down and Misfortune has moved up. Kog is now quite a bit more squishy, and that's a problem as he is already an immobile champion. On the flip side, MF gets some of her speed back, which we've talked about a long time ago, and even her attack speed growth back as well. This should definitely give her some A tier worthy performance, and I'm excited to see what insane Misfortune mains start to do in the ladder. Now, other than that, the rest of the list doesn't have anything worth talking about. The lower end of bot lane is staying relatively stable. Now, moving on to the last, but certainly not least, we gotta talk about supports. Now, this time around, we actually see the least amount of movement out of supports over any other roles this patch. Before we break down tiers, let's talk about something that affects a lot of existing supports: Guardian nerfs. The nerfs to Rune will hurt, yes, but for the scaling champions, and especially the champions who are super defensive, it's really not that big of a deal and you shouldn't be that worried about it. If anything, the list as a whole would shift downward slightly, as many champions on the upper half would have the absolute worst performance, but not bad enough that others would start to take over. Broken tier still features Taric, but we've also added Sona. Comboing with what we've talked about, Sona has definitely been worthy of being called broken. Her strength is just too big, and it's too easy to get her where she is strong. Outside of broken tier though, you'll notice that basically every champion in the higher tiers are Guardian users. That's kind of troubling for balance if you ask me. Now, Zyra is one of those exceptions moving into S tier, how she can catch and actually kill some of those other irritating supports, while also being an excellent pick into the tankier sides of the support roster. Below her, Shaco moves down to A tier. It's pretty difficult for him to make plays with so many defensive tools around, so only picking him for his baiting and boxes definitely diminishes strength. Now, on the lower end of the scale, Rakan and Senna move downward. Senna ADC is just better right now by a really big long shot. Support is definitely suffering, as forcing interactions with her is just not going all that well right now. To round things out, I want to mention Set here. Set support builds full tank and features basically no damage outside of base damage. With his recent nerfs alongside the buffs, this also fundamentally changed how he can scale. Set support should do even worse than he already is right now. You should probably avoid him in support now, as it simply won't perform the same way anymore. Now this rounds out our champion tier list for the new patch 10.18, but if you want to know up-to-date in-depth tips and tricks, GameLeap.com is your one-stop shop if you want to master any of the champions that we talked about in this video or climb the ladder with ease. We have in-depth champion advanced tips and VOD reviews waiting for you on the GameLeap website. Do yourself a favor and go check them out in the links down below. But thank you so much for coming by. I'm aggressively shouting Coach Guy. See you next time.